Good morning. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. Happy to see you all on this beautiful Thursday morning. I'm just going to jump right into things. I know I usually play a little fun video ahead of time, but every time I do that, Facebook or some other media platform restricts me. So we're not going to do that today. I was not here yesterday, unfortunately. I've been having some technical issues. I was having some more technical issues this morning, so I'm running a few minutes late. I don't really know what's going on. Yesterday, I went to load the show, and the never ending circle. It just circles, 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 like it's thinking, processing. It just kept doing that over and over. There was nothing I could do to get past it. And then this morning, it was like a completely different issue. It loaded like immediately, but just wouldn't start. So it's like something going on, I think, with the streaming service, but it could be Good Morning Share. It could be on my end too. It's kind of weird. I woke up this morning. I had to change all my passwords on my social media because I woke up and I had all these notifications from like Facebook and all these other ones that they were transferring my data, then they stopped for security reasons. And I'm like, I wonder if somebody like hacked into my accounts and they're trying to transfer all of my stuff to another account. You know how they do that? They hijack your entire page. And so that kind of freaked me out a little bit. Good morning, Robert. And so I don't know what was going on there. And I didn't really have too much time to look into it, but I thought that was really, really weird. But as usual, it's a Thursday morning, lots to talk about today. As a matter of fact, there's actually is a lot to talk about today because there's a lot going on. And if you guys know me and you've been following me for many years, Iran has been my favorite topic for a very, very long time, not just because of this conflict, but going back many, many years. And so it's so wild to me that here we are in this situation that I've thought about so many times before and different directions it could go. And things are going to step up here in the next day or so. We're going to keep an eye on that. I'm going to talk about that today with Saudi Arabia, Qatar getting into the mix of things, and they're ready to go. It's just a matter of when. I don't think it's an if. I think it's a matter of when, and that is because Israel struck one of Iran's largest gas fields. We're going to talk about that here shortly. And of course, Iran had to retaliate and hit Qatar and hit the Aramco field in Saudi Arabia, which is just a really big no-no. So we're going to talk about the energy crisis. Robert, you probably, and Sherry, both of you probably know quite a bit about that. A lot going on today in that respect. We have the potential possibility for more troops, heading into the Middle East, more American troops. And I'm kind of wondering what's going on. I don't want to, I'm not, this is not an anti-Semitic comment, so please don't go there with me. I've always supported the people of Israel, but every government, they do things where you're like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And I almost feel like Israel is trying to start something more. They're trying to escalate the situation. Donald Trump very unhappy this morning with Israel. And here's something interesting. He never said he's unhappy with Netanyahu. He's unhappy with Israel. So I'm still debating on this situation with Netanyahu, who released another video the other day, missed his, I think it's the 14th or 15th meeting, war meeting, where they discuss all of the things that are going on. Never missed a meeting. He chairs those meetings. Not there. We're going to talk about that too. And the reason why I mentioned that is about Israel is because over in Lebanon, they had one of their jets coming through, and they were actually firing upon an RT news crew, Russian Times news crew. And you wait till you see this missile strike. They're injured. These reporters are injured, hit right behind them. And I'm not ready to say that Israel was intentionally trying to hit them, but we'll show that in a minute. USS Tripoli, of course, arriving into the Middle East. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the WHO preparing for a nuclear catastrophe. The plans are in place, trust me, there's no plan. When it comes to anything nuclear, there is no plan. Good morning, Michelle. Another situation with drones. We'll talk about that, invading one of our military bases. We've got to get a handle on these drones. We're just not doing it. Trump, of course, talking about withdrawing from NATO. I'm going to talk about some new information with missing Major General William Neil McCasland. We're going to talk about that University of Alabama student from the Elmhurst, Chicago area suburb, just like myself, I'm from a suburb of Chicago as well. and missing in Barcelona. It's a very, serious situation that's taking place in Barcelona. Jimmy Gracey, a terrible situation, every parent's worst nightmare. We're going to talk about that too. Good morning, Tammy. Good morning, Mary. Good morning, Joe. So obviously we've got a lot to talk about. It's like, where do we even start? There's just so much. We're hearing a lot of talk about, of course, the USS Tripoli heading into the Middle East. I told you the other day when I was here on Tuesday, they had stopped through Singapore. It's estimated about 2,500 troops on the USS Tripoli. We know that the Trump administration is trying to work out a deal with the Pentagon to fund another, I think, is it $200 billion towards this conflict in Iran. And so that's something they're kind of mulling over, talking about sending additional troops in. And, a lot of people are not happy with me right now. I made a Facebook post the other day, and it's nothing unusual because I've talked about it here on this show. What does it look like if we lose the war in Iran? Now, it's not because we're not capable of winning. Like I've said so many times before, we're certainly capable of winning. We could wipe Iran off the face of the map, that's for sure. There's no question about that. But we can't do that without mass casualty. So we're kind of at this pivotal situation, and I think it's pretty obvious to see which direction we're going in. Now, we all know Donald Trump. Donald Trump does not like to lose, right? And he will not lose this war. He won't. If he stops now, we've lost. And I know some of you guys are going to say, no, we haven't lost because we've taken out their commanders, we've taken out the Ayatollah, we've taken out some of, not all of, but we've taken out a good portion of their Navy ships and their Air Force. And we've certainly done a lot of damage. Every day we do more damage, but we've not done anything that's going to make any necessary changes. If we walk away today, they still have their uranium. They're still going to continue with their nuclear program. They just have other Ayatollahs that step up and replace the other ones. And the Ayatollah we killed isn't even the top Ayatollah. There is another one that's even higher than him, which I did not even realize until a couple weeks ago. And good morning, Phyllis. Good morning, Curtis. And if we leave now, all we've really done is created a bigger monster, right? Because now, it's like kicking a hornet's nest, is what my grandpa back in the day used to say. We've kicked the hornet's nest, and now we've gotten Iran angry, and they're launching missiles at pretty much everything. Several of them, making it through the Iron Dome defense system over in Israel. And I remember the last time that this situation happened with Iran and Israel. I think we determined that the Iron Dome had a capability of it was able to take out about 67% of the missiles coming its way. So they've still been hit, pretty hard, of course. And they don't really talk as much about the damage or casualties, but we know there certainly has been some, including what may or may not have happened to Netanyahu, which we'll talk about later. But we're at this very pivotal point where Donald Trump, worried about the Strait of Hormuz, of course. He's not asking for NATO's help in fighting Iran. He's asking for NATO's help in opening the Strait of Hormuz. And that has taken another turn also, and we'll talk about that here in a few moments. Now, it's my understanding that the troops that are coming in, and now, of course, we don't always know the strategic plan. Sometimes they will make it seem like our troops are there to do one thing when really they're there to do something else. And from what I understand, at least the plan that I'm hearing is that, good morning, Karen. Good morning, Nancy. Good morning, Rob. The plan that I'm hearing is that we have our troops coming in about 2,500, potentially another up to, I've heard 10,000 or more to follow. That has not been officially, I don't think, approved yet, but by the time they approve it, they'll already be there. By the time we hear about it, they'll probably already be there. And what I'm hearing the goal is that these 2,500 troops, along with naval support, we're going to have some Navy SEALs there, from what I understand, other naval support. And I don't know what Israel's role is in this. Again, they recalled, I think it was 450,000 reservists. A lot of them, though, being dispersed over to Lebanon, so not all related to Iran. I don't know what role they'll play. But it's my understanding that the goal is to storm Karg Island and a port there at the Strait of Hormuz. Now, I think we all know if that happens, that's a very dangerous situation for our troops. But we're in a very critical situation right now, not only with the entire situation in Iran, but also the energy crisis that is unfolding because of the Strait of Hormuz being closed. And technically, excuse me, sorry, I hope I don't start coughing, because you know me, if I start coughing, I will not stop. As Iran stated the other day, we talked about it on Tuesday, the Strait of Hormuz is actually open to anyone but American and Israeli related tankers. But the problem that they're facing is that everyone's too scared to go through the Strait of Hormuz. And so that's a whole issue in itself, is that while there's all these tankers that could go through, Iran has said they could go through, they're scared that if they do, they're going to get attacked. So they just don't. You know, Donald Trump's working out an insurance plan. It's like a $20 billion insurance plan that will force these tankers to go through the strait. I don't know how all that works. I just saw it this morning, but somehow that will force them to go through. They'll be insured. But I mean, you know, I'm sure the people that work on these tankers are like, we're not going through there. It's not about getting the, you know, petroleum through. It's about the fact that we might get killed trying to go through. You know, if Iran strikes us, we've seen already countless tankers, of course, destroyed. So that's one issue. So we're being told that these troops are coming in to storm that port, to storm the Karg Island area, because they want to open up this Strait of Hormuz. Now, by force, you know, Iran's not going to do it. They're not going to let us through. So we're going to do it by force. And I'm kind of confused about the whole thing. And maybe one of you can fill me in on this, because there are things that I just don't understand. Good morning, Mary. And what I don't understand is that Donald Trump tells us that only 1% of our oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know what Israel's part in this is. So why do we care outside of global impact? Because it is, you know, certainly affecting the world. We have Sri Lanka, who again has made Wednesdays a public holiday, so people aren't going back and forth to work. Egypt has just told all businesses to close at 9 p.m. They don't want anyone, you know, using any type of energy after 9 o'clock. They're trying to conserve as much as they possibly can. But I would feel that that's maybe to some degree about the tankers coming through, but more so all the strikes on the natural gas fields, which has been taking place, you know, for several days now, as well as the, you know, Aramco now in Saudi Arabia being attacked. I can see where those things cause an energy crisis for sure. And I understand that tankers coming through are very vital assets to a lot of countries, obviously not the United States. But I'm just kind of wondering why we, the United States, are fighting so hard. And some of you listening probably thinks that's the dumbest question I could possibly ask, because the answer is so obvious. But I will admit when I don't know, and I truly do not know. Outside of it, you know, causing some global impacts, of course, which is important. You know, if other countries have failing economies or societal collapses, it certainly does affect us. But I would think that they're more affected by these strikes onto their oil fields and onto their natural gas fields than anything coming through the Strait of Hormuz. But I could be wrong there. I don't know. But either way, that is our focus, is that Strait of Hormuz. But we're also in a very serious situation. So let's say, do we get this through? We go in by force. We're certainly going to lose troops. I mean, we might as well just consign ourselves to understanding that that's going to happen, because Iran they're prepared. They know, I mean, in this day, you can't really hide anything. We, the people, know what's going on. So of course the Iranian regime knows what's going on as well. And it's kind of interesting. They released a video ahead of, and I know that you probably find these things as funny as I do, but they released a video ahead of the idea that American troops were going to come in. So I'm going to show this to you here really quick. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We get the picture. I don't know what he's saying either way, but you know, they're talking about, you know, the warning to Americans and Israelis that, hey, you put your boots down on, you know, our land, you attempt to take our port or anything else, we're going to slaughter you, is basically the message they're giving us. And I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible for us to have boots on the ground at this port, you know, they're near the Strait of Hormuz or at Karg Island without suffering some pretty serious losses of our troops. And I posted this on Facebook because I really feel like I don't know where we're going from here. Of course, I support Donald Trump. Of course, I do feel that a regime change is absolutely necessary for the future of America. When people talk about imminent danger, that's been such a big topic of conversation lately. Is did we have to do this because we were in imminent danger? I don't personally know about imminent danger, like something was going to happen today, tomorrow, next week. I don't feel like it was that imminent. But like I've said before, and this is not for strangely, this is not even the reason why we did this. But once again, we know that Iran was creating a missile that had nuclear capabilities that could target the United States. But in all the arguments I've heard over it being an imminent threat. Not one time has anybody ever brought up that missile, but I know it's true, yet I have not heard one single person talk about it. And I would think if somebody like Donald Trump or somebody in his administration stood up and said, "Hey," because I mean, they just talked about this missile literally like 3 or 4 days before this entire mission began. And I think if somebody stood up on a stage and said, "Hey, Americans, world, we had to do this because Iran was creating a missile that was capable of reaching the United States, which means it could reach a lot of other places as well that had nuclear capabilities," I would consider that possibly an imminent threat. Certainly, they build missiles pretty darn quick over there, and we don't know how far it was going to go. We don't know how the testing was going to go. It's not built yet. The missile was not built yet, but they were in the process of building it. I don't know how far along they were, but that was some intelligence that we received. But nobody has said a word about that. I'm like, well, that would be a pretty easy answer why we went over there. But if the threat was their nuclear program, we've done absolutely nothing at this point to stop that. I don't even see how we can do anything to stop that, quite honestly, as much as we would like to try. I know, we've hit a lot of their bunkers, and we're trying to get to it, but I don't really see that happening. The regime change, as much as I would like to say that could happen, and as much as I think it's possible for it to happen, you have to remember, Iran is a country made up of a lot of different people. It kind of reminds me of the war in Syria, quite honestly, in so many different ways, but the opposite of what's happening in Iran. But in Iran, from what I understand, it's like 2/3 of the people in Iran support the regime. These are people who want to live under strict Sharia law. They're Islamicists. They don't want to leave. They don't want Western values. They don't want to stop wearing their black burqas. It's part of their religion, and it's something that they do because it's what they want to do, not because they're forced to do it. And so anytime we take out some members of the regime, of course, I mean, how many millions of people over there do they have that are supporting the regime? We see the, of course, thousands upon thousands of people who are in Iran protesting the regime, but those people I've heard only make up about a third of the country. And they're a very important third of the country, of course, and many of them, of course, were killed. So I don't know. I don't think a regime change is as easy as it seems to be. I kind of expected the Ayatollah to flee and some of their top leaders to flee, and that the people, would kind of take it upon themselves to make sure a regime change occurred. But when you look at the totality of Iran and the people of Iran and how many people are for the regime and how many people are against it, it's certainly not an easy feat. I don't know what we would have to have over them to, really complete a regime change. But either way, it's not something we can do overnight. I don't think we're looking at any type of long-term war situation in Iran either. I don't see that happening. This isn't going to be another Afghanistan or another Iraq. That's not going to happen. And I still think that we're going to get this situation solved rather quickly. But in the end, have we won, or, have we lost? Are we going to open up the Strait of Hormuz by force and consider that the win, and then just that's it, just end? And then we have to think about the other side of that. That's us, America. We might say, okay, we don't want to lose any more troops. We're going to open the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to pack our bags and head back home, and we're just going to let Iran be and let them work it out themselves. Or maybe let the Gulf states work it out, because there's something getting ready to happen there as well. And but what about Israel? Is Israel ready to just hang up their hat, or are they going to say, okay, we didn't accomplish what we wanted to do. We didn't get a regime change. We've kicked the hornet's nest, and now we've got a bunch of very angry, Islamicists on our hands who have sleeper cells all, planted all across the entire world. It's almost like you have to do it all or do nothing, right? All in or nothing. So all in is a really big deal, and that would be potentially a situation that takes a very long time to unfold. And we're just in a very precarious position right now, and I think in the next day or so, we're going to find out a lot more because in the next day or so, we're going to see a situation where we're very likely, if not 100%, going to see Saudi Arabia and Qatar step up because they've both about had it. I don't know about the United Arab Emirates, they've about had it too. And these countries are going to step up because now they're angry. And I think most of you know what happened and is that Donald Trump said we wouldn't strike the gas fields in Iran because we knew Iran is tit for tat. We've talked about this before, and they're very much eye for an eye. If you kill their mom, they're going to kill your mom. Is one of the situations is, and so Donald Trump had promised that we weren't going to strike their gas fields and things like that. Now we've threatened to do it if they didn't do something we wanted them to do, but or if they did some big attack on us, we've threatened to do it, but we weren't actually going to do it according to Donald Trump. Well, Israel, according to Donald Trump, got upset. Again, he didn't say Netanyahu. At no point did he say Netanyahu. He said Israel got upset. And he said they're angry. Obviously, they're angry. We don't, for a lot of different reasons. Of course, they have every right to be angry. And they took it upon themselves to strike the natural gas field there in Iran, one of their largest. And of course, that upset Iran quite a bit. And so, in retaliation, because they thought it was the United States, just because we just threatened them, literally, we just threatened them that we were going to strike that gas field, and then we didn't, but Israel did. At least that's the story, we're being told publicly. And so, Iran, though, thinking the United States conducted that strike, they went against us, and instead they struck Aramco oil field in Saudi Arabia, which, if you know what Aramco is, you'll know that's a really big deal. And they also struck a natural gas field in Qatar and another facility, I can't recall, somewhere else. And so now everybody's really upset. Saudi Arabia ordered all Americans to leave. They're like, leave now. You have to leave now. Qatar, again, telling Americans, leave now. And when countries start saying Americans leave now, that means something's about to go down. And I think Saudi Arabia, I think Qatar, I think the United Arab Emirates, they have just had enough. They've had enough. And it's my understanding that the king, is it Solomon? I never can remember. King Solomon reached out to Israel and is trying to form an alliance with Israel now over this latest strike. They're very upset with Iran, and I think we're going to see some action on their part. I don't know what that action will be. I don't know what they intend to do. I don't know what their capabilities are. I know very little about the Saudi Arabian, or the Qatari military. I know that Saudi Arabia, of course, has conducted strikes on the Houthis and in some other different types of militant groups that are, of course, Iranian backed. So there's really nothing too unusual there. And Mary says, will the California pipeline Trump opened help our supply? That's just it, Mary. I mean, if you listen to, I wish I knew more about this topic, quite honestly. I don't know if Robert's listening. Robert probably does. I know there's a few of you probably know. I just don't know as much about our oil supply as I should. And I, listen to what other folks say. And I know Donald Trump said that only 1% of our oil is coming through the Strait of Hormuz, which seems strange because we're awfully concerned with the Strait of Hormuz, maybe again for global impact. But I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if what were the price increases we're seeing is just price gouging, if this really does affect us. I know Robert mentioned again the other day about fertilizer, that if we can't get those petroleum products through, we're not going to have fertilizer for our farms. I know there's a lot of concern about diesel exhaust fluid, making it, not necessarily here to the United States, but to other countries, that if you don't have diesel exhaust fluid, if I can get it out, your economy will absolutely collapse. If every truck, let's say, in our country just stopped today because they don't have any DEF, diesel exhaust fluid, our entire economy would just collapse that fast. But some countries are talking, this is hitting the world pretty hard, or it's just propaganda. And this is where things get tough. Is it really that bad? Or we always have to ask, or is this NATO, we're going to talk about NATO in a few moments, is this just propaganda against Donald Trump because they want it to look like we, the United States, caused this global impact due to us partnering with Israel and striking Iran? And I can't recall who it was that said it the other day, but it is absolutely true that much of the world hopes that the world is in absolute chaos just so they can blame Donald Trump. There's no question about that. I think that Donald Trump felt that there was imminent danger, that we had to do this, and he did what he had to do. I don't dispute that. I'm not against what we did. I think we did it because we had to do it. And let's see here. Jay says there is no shortage. It's all 100% market issue with futures and driving the price up over what ifs. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, Jay. I know our gas here where I live is over $4 a gallon now. And Mary says probably both. And Pam says it was challenging to fix the DEF systems during COVID. Yes, it was. They couldn't get parts. It took down several trucking fleets. Pam, I do remember that. And there are a lot of petroleum products that are absolutely essential. I was reading a report yesterday, and I don't know if this is going too far or not. Again, I don't, it's so hard to differentiate propaganda, which I feel like the WHO is doing, getting prepared for a nuclear war. A nuclear war is not going to happen. And I don't think, that's my best guess, is we'll never see a nuclear war in our lifetime. There's too many better options these days than to go nuclear. But you never know what's propaganda and what's not. But I was reading a report yesterday that because of the Strait of Hormuz being closed, and the petroleum products that aren't getting through and some of the other products that aren't getting through, that there's 45 million people facing famine and starvation because of supply that can't get through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's propaganda. I just do not know. There's some things I just don't know. And good morning, Kim. And I think they're just trying to say, hey, United States, you guys really screwed up. And now the world is feeling your impact. And I feel like, the whole house of cards is kind of coming down around us. And it does really worry me, quite honestly, that if the situation Iran, I feel like this is either a war we can't win at all because we cannot risk the casualties, or number two, and probably the most obvious situation, is that we're going to go all in, all or nothing, and we're going to have a lot of casualties, and that's just going to be the way it is. So it's one of those two things are going to happen. We're either going to have to call it quits, walk away with our tail behind our legs, unfortunately, or we're going to have to go all in. And going all in, quite honestly, is going to cost us a lot of lives. It's going to cost Iran a lot of lives as well. But we're certainly going to lose a good number of our troops. And that's a big concern. And not to mention, if we do go all in, you talk about sleeper cells being activated, boy, they're going to be on every street corner trying to get us. So a lot to think about there. And I have a feeling that by tomorrow, we're going to have a lot more information on what's getting ready to happen, because we're going to have a better idea of what these troops are doing. Usually by the time we hear about it, they've already done it. I think this is something that's going to happen. But again, if we know it's happening, Iran knows it's happening. There's no element of surprise anymore, right? Remember back in the old days when they didn't have radar and they couldn't track all these different things, and everything was a surprise assault. They didn't expect. The fog would clear. You've seen the movies. The fog clears, and you see the warships on the horizon, or you have the guy standing on top of the mountain, with his little telescope looking and shouting to people, they're here. We don't have the element of surprise anymore, and that puts our troops in a lot of danger, but and I know, and if you want to say this, you're going to say, okay, well, they're going to have air support, they're going to have this, but you have to remember this. The plan allegedly is take these amphibious vehicles into the port onto Karg Island. Okay, well, that's an area that's covered in mines, so they're going to have to navigate these mines. It's just a bad situation. And I'm not saying Trump doesn't have a plan, because I can promise you, we have the best military on the planet. We have the best military planners on the planet. We have these excellent, and I know a couple of these guys who are, senior military analysts who are working very hard at making sure there's a clear plan so that we can be successful, minimize our casualties. But we're going to have some casualties if we do this. But at the same time, I don't see Donald Trump walking away. I really don't. No, I know, you're right. It's actually a coal product, right? DEF is a coal product. But for whatever reason, they're not able to get their material through from what I understand, to make DEF. But DEF is a coal product, from what I'm understanding. Because I remember back a couple of years ago when China shut down their coal mines, they were trying to go, worrying about the climate change. They shut down all their coal mines, but it was somehow, some type of product that they made that came from something to do with the coal, and they stopped sending it over to South Korea. The South Korean economy nearly collapsed, and I don't know much again about that and how urea comes from. Maybe urea comes from coal. And Charlie says, don't ever say that you're friends with military intelligence. You just lose any veracity you might have had. I'm not sure what you mean, Charlie. And Jay says, don't think for a second we don't have the ability to move troops undetected. I agree, Jay. But it's like it's a tough situation. The situation in Iran is it's a tough situation. We have the best military on the planet, the best military on the planet. And at the same time, we know we could wipe Iran off the face of the map if that's what we wanted to do. But of course, we can't do that without facing, the rest of the world, coming at us. We'll just have to see how things unfold. We're going to know more every day. This is going to unfold, and we're going to know more. I don't know. I'm not sure what you meant, Charlie, but yeah, a good friend of mine is a military analyst in the Pentagon, and I have not talked to him. I don't know what's going on, but I absolutely trust that we've got the best people in place, the best people in place. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But I hope that when we're ramping up our defense going forward, whatever happens, regardless in the situation in Iran, I hope we start working on our drone programs. That is, there's two things we're lacking there. Is A, we're lacking the drones, that we need. We can't even compete with most countries. We can't compete, honestly, with Iran on the drones. We can't compete with, certainly not Russia on their geranium drones. But more so, we can't even shoot down the drones over our military bases. I was just reading this morning how Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio were in Washington at a military base, an unknown military base, and there were two unidentified drones that flew, very near to where they were on this military base. And we don't know who the drones belong to. We don't know what type of mission they were on. They were not military drones. They were they were in restricted airspace, and we did nothing. We did absolutely nothing. And if you've been following these cases, there have been so many instances where we have these unidentified drones flying into restricted airspace, if I can talk right, over our military bases. And we're told, if I don't know if you call this case, I don't know, maybe it was a year ago, several months ago, there was a situation where we had these drones, and I think that was in Texas. And I'm not talking about most recently when we had that incident where they had the airports, in El Paso closed. It wasn't anything like that. This was before that, but there was a drone. I'm almost positive it was in Texas. And they said, well, we can't shoot it down because there's laws that, we don't know who the drone belongs to. It's somebody else's personal property, and we're not allowed to shoot down somebody's personal property. So we just have to let it go. I'm like, that's the dumbest thing I think I've ever heard. I mean, why? Okay, so let's just say these two drones seen in Washington in the same vicinity as Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of War, right? And Marco Rubio, also, of course, very vital to our government, and we can't shoot these drones down. Now, good and well, if this was any other country, and they even Ukraine, for gosh sakes, excuse me, any other country, and these drones were flying around in restricted military space, they would have shot them down. Here, what we try to do is we try to hack into the drone and we try to force it down, but that doesn't always work. And we have no program that just shoots drones out of the sky. I don't understand why. I really don't understand why. And Pam says, blah, 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 shoot the drone down. Exactly. Just shoot the darn thing. And oh, sorry, Charlie. Couple senior military strategists, bad joke. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of interesting, Charlie. A long time ago, I don't get any information anymore, but a good friend of mine works directly for the J8 team at the Pentagon. He works directly under the Joint Chief of Staff. I haven't talked to him in a while. He may not even be there anymore. But when he did, my goal was trying to find out about the aliens. I never tried to find out about any missions. I'm like, what do you know about the aliens? That's always my first question. And we're going to talk about aliens tomorrow, by the way, on the show tomorrow. We're not going to talk about it today because we've got too many other important things to talk about. But we are going to talk about the aliens tomorrow. But anyway, we've got a big issue with drones. Somebody in our government needs to say, hey, these drones are the way of the future, particularly in combat. We got to step it up. Because if you think about it, what's going on in Iran right now, how often do you hear American drones attacked this, or that? I mean, it's just not happening. We've got to get up, build up our resources on the drones, not only in building drones, but knowing how to take the drones out without using these very expensive missiles that we're using. And I know, that's of course why we've got Ukraine in the mix. Hopefully they're going to help us out a little bit with that. Before we move on to some other things, I wanted to talk a little bit more about Netanyahu. And I'm not, again, I'm talking about this just because I find it interesting. Has nothing to do with Israel, has nothing to do with his faith. I just find the whole situation very interesting because we know how we've talked so much about propaganda, how much propaganda is out there when it comes to any type of war, right? Well, Netanyahu released another video. I would have played it yesterday, but I was not, of course, wasn't able to do a show yesterday. That's probably why. Somebody's probably like, she's going to be talking about a bunch of nonsense again, so let's just take her down. But Netanyahu made another video, and again, people are saying it's AI, it's not real. And I'm just going to show it to you. You've probably already seen it. He is with, I believe this is Steve Witkoff, from what I understand. Am I saying that right? I can't remember who this guy is.
Mr. Minister, I want you to know the president asked me to come and make sure you were okay.
Yes, Mike. Yes, I'm alive.
I checked that, and I'm happy to see that. But he wanted to make sure because, you guys get along too well.
I know, and we shake hands with 5 fingers in each hand. But I have to tell you, I'm alive, but I have this card.
Oh.
And yeah, don't read it. So it's a punch card.
Mm-hmm.
Today I erased 2 names on the punch cards, and you see how many more to go on this batch.
You know what the good news is? My name is not on the punch card.
Your name is on the list of the good guys.
Thank you.
And what the president, the U.S. forces are doing is incredible. We're very proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. And getting rid of these lunatics would like to develop nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them to every American city after wiping out Israel.
Okay, so they're very clearly trying to prove that Netanyahu is alive. I'm uninjured. Here I am. But yet, I'm not an AI expert. I wish I were, because I've posted videos before and somebody says, oh, that's AI, take that down. I can't always spot AIs, but the people who can and people who analyze things for AI and run these videos through this program, they said this is, again, AI. I think this is like the 3rd AI video released, directly on Netanyahu's personal X account. And it's kind of interesting because, again, they've had I think they said Netanyahu has missed, it's either 14 or 15 Security Council meetings in Israel. And these are meetings he chairs that he's always been at. He's never missed before, from what I understand. And now all of a sudden, 14, 15 meetings go by and he's not been there. And Donald Trump is not referring to Netanyahu anymore, if you've noticed. He's talking about Israel, does not mention Netanyahu. So I don't know. Again, more conspiracy talk. I was talking to somebody about it the other day and they're like, oh yeah, you're definitely talking conspiracy. And Dottie, does he normally speak English that well? Little to no accent. I do think so, Dottie. I've not heard a lot of him speaking. I don't watch the news, I read it. So when you read the news, you miss out a lot of those little nuances. But I've seen video clips of him before. I do absolutely think that it sounds like him. And Jay says, personally, I think if there was an inkling of this being true, regardless of how they want to hide it, every news organization would be all over this, and they aren't. Yeah, Jay, I don't know. You make certainly a good point. And again, I'm not saying that Netanyahu is dead. I'm not even saying that he's injured. I'm saying that's not him in these videos. So it could be that he's in a bunker hiding with good reason. there is a huge target on his head. And unlike Donald Trump here in the United States, Iran certainly has the capability of reaching Netanyahu in a different way than they do Donald Trump, in a totally different way. But we also know here in the United States, and I don't hear, here's the thing, Jay, and this is when you talk about what's on the news and what's not on the news, is that the news doesn't cover everything, because we know that Kash Patel gave a statement, what was it, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, that they foiled an attempted assassination on Donald Trump and some members of the Trump administration. I have not one time heard this on the news, not even once. And it was directly linked to Iran, directly linked. I posted it, I shared it on social media, I put it out there, I've talked about it on the show. I haven't heard one single news agency talk about it. I haven't read one single article talking about it. Here we had somebody in our country, and here's the crazy part: we don't even know this person's name. We had somebody in our country who is somehow affiliated with Iran, who was here with the purpose of assassinating our president and members of his team, and yet no one talks about it. It's not on the news. So to me, not everything that's viable or everything that's true is going to make it to the mainstream news. And I think we all know the answer to that. We used to know the answer. I think a lot of us have forgotten that mainstream news is bought and paid for. And it's bought and paid for by a lot of different people, a lot of different organizations. And there's a lot of information that they tell the news don't talk about. It doesn't matter if Donald Trump is president or Joe Biden or Obama. The news is all controlled by private entities who have an interest in world affairs and what's going on for many different reasons. And that's exactly why I'm a firm believer: turn the TV off. Don't watch the news, and if you're reading news, I do not read any mainstream news. I don't read ABC or NBC or Fox even, or CNN or MS. I don't read any of their news. I look for other sources, because I know that anything these news agencies talking about, it's all paid propaganda. They're feeding you a narrative of whatever it is they want you to believe. And sometimes there's truth in those narratives, and sometimes there's not. And more than anything, it's what they don't tell you, that's most important. You really got to go out and kind of look outside the box, for real news sometimes, unfortunately. And Pam says the situation with Netanyahu is crazy. If they took him out, what would happen next? Pam, I don't, if it, let's just say, I don't know what's going on with Netanyahu. Again, something has happened to him. He's hiding in a bunker, who knows, quite honestly. But let's just say that something did happen and Netanyahu was, no longer with us, or was injured and unable to, potentially incapacitated. He has an entire team of people, just like we do. If somebody took out Donald Trump, we have Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio and Susie Wiles and a whole team of people to step up and make decisions for him. And so I'm not really surprised, that they would just carry on, quite honestly. I think you would see little nuances that something's not right. But I can tell you one thing, I can promise you one thing, is that they would not allow anyone to know. They would hide it to the end, and for good reason, not because they're, terrible people. They would hide it because obviously they don't want to give Iran a strategic advantage. Can you imagine if Iran thought that and trust me, if you read Russian news, if you read Iranian news, if you read Al Jazeera, any foreign news, they are definitely talking about it. They're just not talking about it in American news. That's the difference. And and let's just say it did happen. Well, we can't let Iran know that Israel is at a weakened state. They would consider that to be a weakened state. Can you imagine Iran if they knew for sure that they took out Netanyahu or Donald Trump? They would be parading in the streets. They would be having themselves a national holiday over it. They would say they won, and they would probably start striking Israel like they've never been struck before. So I think there's a good strategic reason why, if Netanyahu was harmed or injured, why he wouldn't be seen, or why they wouldn't know. And Ryan says he does speak English fluently. Layla says, will we ever really know the truth? I just heard something from somebody that just retired from the military in China. China we know is definitely in bed with Iran. And if the people saying that they weren't trying to make nuclear weapons to hit the United States, why do you think they had the Chinese balloon flying over the United States a few years ago, especially traveling to all of the major military bases? And the Biden administration let that happen and was instructing the military to not shoot it down, to stand down, if that doesn't tell you a lot. Here's the thing, Layla, at least this is just my opinion, and it's perfectly fine for you to tell me I'm crazy. Perfectly fine for you to tell me I'm crazy. But remember when that balloon came through that they said was China? I saw it my own eyes. Many of us did. I was driving over the Poplar Street Bridge, and there it went. I'm like, oh my God, there's the Chinese balloon that we never shot down. I agree that entire time. I'm like, why can't we shoot this down? And there's one of two things that could happen. One thing, and then I'm going to tell you what I think is really what happened. It could be a situation where, just like I said with the drones, we have drones flying onto our military bases, drones, unidentified drones in restricted airspace. We're not shooting them down. Now, I'm told, again, that's because they're personal property, and we have laws in the United States where we don't shoot down items that belong to someone else. I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that at all, because you know what? If you take one step across the border into restricted space, guess what? They're going to come and grab you and take you to jail, right? You're going to be arrested. If you fly an airplane over restricted airspace, guess what? They're going to warn you, they're going to escort you out, and if you don't leave, they're going to shoot you down. But not drones. And we certainly know drones can be equipped not only for, to potentially take communications and take photos and other things that are a threat to our security, but also drones can be equipped with various weapons. And so I think it's a huge threat. And why they're not taking them down, I don't know. But here's what's interesting about that Chinese weather balloon, for any of you who recall those days, is remember when we saw the Chinese weather balloon, there was also this big mass of UFO sightings. Do you remember that? And it was the weirdest thing ever. And I don't really know how all that correlates together. And maybe there was a lot going on that we don't know about. But at the same time as we saw that weather balloon, there were multiple UFO sightings. And in fact, it's probably one of the most credible UFO sightings I think I've personally witnessed outside of what happened in Las Vegas, at which we're going to talk about tomorrow because there's some new UFO stuff going on. But what's interesting is that you remember that there was one that was like the cigar shape that they saw right about the same time as the weather balloon. There was one that looked like a glass like pyramid that they were seeing at the same time. And then there was like a big black object that they were seeing at the same time. Those three. Now, I think there was a total of four, but those are the three that I remember most. And one of them, which I think was the glass one, was shot down over the Yukon. Do you remember that? And they were talking about, well, can we retrieve it? And then they just stopped talking about it altogether. And then we had Senator Kennedy come out, and I wish I had this clip today to play for you. I'll see if I can find it for tomorrow. It was one of the most ominous clips I think I've ever seen. And back then I was on that show, The Edge, and I can remember Vic and the guys giving me a tough time, saying, oh, he's just joking. I'm like, this man is not joking. This man is not joking. He was telling people, hey, I'd be a little worried, I'd be locking my doors at night because whatever that was went down, a suspected UFO, unidentified object. It looked like a glass, like triangle or something like the octagon. I can't remember the shape of it. And they were going to go in and recover it. From what I understand, they couldn't find it. I think eventually they did recover whatever it was. And then no one talked about it again. But Senator Kennedy made a very clear statement. Hey, Americans, I'd be locking your door if I were you at night. And I don't think he was kidding. I think he meant it. I think there was something going on with that Chinese balloon that we don't understand. Maybe it was tracking whatever these objects were. Maybe the balloon was something more, than just a balloon. They're not going to tell us the truth, of course. So I think there was a lot more to that Chinese balloon. And Layla says, I never watch the news. The news is no good. Don't watch it. And Jay says, every source has its own bias. Yeah, also true. But what you got to do, Jay, at least in my opinion, and what I do a lot of is that I try to find first person accounts. It's not easy to do. It takes a lot of time. Thankfully, I'm an insomniac. So I've got a lot of time on my hands, at times in the middle of the night. But I go and I try to find on the ground sources, because in this day and time, you can find somebody from anywhere. If you want to find people who live in Sri Lanka to tell you what's really going on in their country, trust me, you can go and you can find them. And that's what I try to do. I try to find people in these different countries and get firsthand accounts. And then I read what the news is, mostly foreign news. I see headlines in U.S. news. If something real interesting, I might look at it. But most of the time, I'm just looking and kind of trying to piece it all together myself, connecting all those dots myself and trying to come up with what's really, going on. And if you only listen to one news source, I'm not saying, Jay, that you do that or that any of you are doing that. But if you only listen to one or two news sources and it's mainstream news, your ears are going to be filled with propaganda and probably not much more. And Jay says, sorry, liberal media hates him. They would be all over it, screaming, we told you so. I don't know, Jay. Liberal media also believes anything they're told. And if they see all these videos, liberal media, if you think about it, they haven't said not one word about Netanyahu either direction, not either way. And you also have to remember, Jay, is that most news networks, most film studios are all owned by Jews. And that's not a bad thing. They're my clients. I mean, a lot of these people I know, and they're very good people. And I've gotten to work with some of them. And, I'm not saying that in any negative way. I'm just saying that they are owned by the very people who don't want you to know what could potentially be going on. So don't forget that. It's not a bad thing. I'm not complaining about it. I work with these people. These are my clients. So I'm not saying that. I'm just saying if they don't want it to get out, trust me, it's not going to get out. And Jay says, because the previous administration was afraid of repercussions, they only shot it down after it completed its purpose. Yeah. And I can remember what it looked like. And they said, oh, it's a camera. But here's the thing. We don't really know. We know what they feed us. They could shoot anything down out of the air. We could see a UFO flying through town right now and they shoot it down. They say, oh, it was just a Mylar balloon. Not too long ago, there was a situation like that. There was a drone. Remember when the El Paso airport was closed down? Well, there was so many crazy stories about that. We had the military, on one end of the military, they were saying, well, we closed the El Paso airport. And they originally were going to close it for 10 days to all traffic, which was pretty crazy. And they were saying, oh, it was over a dispute over restricted airspace. Well, then somebody else said, no, that's not it. They closed it because unidentified drones are flying into the airspace, and we think they're cartels. And then the story was on that same day, just a couple hours after they closed the airspace, all of a sudden the news reports, the headlines, we shot down, 2 cartel drones over, this Air Force base. They were flying through unauthorized and we shot them down. And then the story later on was, no, those weren't cartel drones. They were Mylar balloons. They shot down Mylar balloons. And then you have witnesses on the ground. This is how crazy this story is. Witnesses on the ground with video saying, no, they were UFOs. There were 2 or 3 UFOs flying over the Air Force base and they were shooting at them, and I think they did shoot them down according to this witness. And there's a video. I have a whole video that this guy took of them allegedly shooting down, these UFOs over that airspace. So we don't know what the truth is. Where we were given 4 different explanations, and we have no idea which one of them is true. Was it a Mylar balloon? Was it a cartel drone? Was it a UFO? Was it, an enemy drone? We don't know who it belongs to. Was it just over airspace restrictions? We have no idea. And you know what? We'll never know. Because even though as much as I support Donald Trump, and God knows I do support Donald Trump, as much as I support him, there are still things that are for our own good that the government cannot tell us. And there are classified things that they cannot tell us. So when it comes to Chinese weather balloons, when it comes to Netanyahu, when it comes to Donald Trump and his own safety and security, when it comes to these UFOs, they see that as a threat to national security if we, the people, know. They don't want people to panic, so they don't tell people things. You know how it goes. I don't have to tell you guys. I am preaching to the choir. And let's see. And Jay says, too many outside news sources not tied to U.S. media conglomerate. Well, and that's true. And that's a very good thing, isn't it? Many, many outside news sources. I would like to completely get rid of mainstream media, completely get rid of those U.S. media conglomerates you're talking about. I would much rather listen to independent journalists. Independent journalists is where it's at right now. No question about it. Joe, and I'm not sure if that's what you're saying, Jay, but that's what I'm saying. Independent journalists is where it's at. Joe says the only reason I listen to mainstream media is to know what BS narrative they are trying to push. Then I go find the actual truth. Isn't that right, Joe? I kind of laughed the other day because people on my Facebook page were talking about the news, and I'm like, seriously? And I'm not talking about any of you guys here on the show. So it was people I didn't know, but they were talking about mainstream media, and I'm like, how have we forgotten what mainstream media did to us? Just a couple of years ago, how they punished us, how they censored us. I mean, I'm not going to forget. And when I see mainstream news, I think 100% propaganda. People on my Facebook page yesterday, and we're going to talk about withdrawing from NATO. I made a post about Donald Trump talking about withdrawing from NATO. And of course, people who are uninformed think, oh, well, this is not our war with Iran. This has nothing to do with Iran. Trump has wanted to withdraw from NATO long before the situation with Iran. I mean, he campaigned on the potential possibility of withdrawing from NATO. It's what he was going to do when his term ended, after his 2016 term ended. His goal was to withdraw from the UN and from NATO. So that's not new news. He just happened to mention it again because he's aggravated with them once again. But I remember back in the day what they did to us and how much they censored us. And we're still censored to some degree, not as bad as it was. But I remember back then, people, and now on my Facebook page, people are like, oh, Russia's a communist country. Russia's not a communist country. As a matter of fact, Putin has never even served as president, under a communist country. And Putin, we know, and it goes back to the Iran, conflict we're having right now as well. Donald Trump has a good relationship with China's President Xi. They have a good relationship. He has a good relationship with Putin. These two countries, while they might be providing intel, to Iran, okay, well, we still have a good relationship with Xi. A lot of propaganda wants to say we hate China, but that's not the case. If you ask Donald Trump, they have a good relationship. And if they didn't, we would be in a very different situation than we are right now because China owns us. Whether we like it or not, China owns us. We couldn't survive without China. There's no way. They provide our medical, some of our medical equipment, our medications. We could not survive without them. So trust me, whether we see it or not, China is not the enemy that we often think that they are. And we, the United States, even having a good relationship with Xi and with Putin, we still assisted Ukraine. And I know that Putin couldn't wait to get Joe Biden out and Donald Trump in so that they could kind of change the course of things. And we do still support Ukraine, but in a different way now than what we did. And even Donald Trump gave a speech the other day at his, he's sitting at his desk in the Oval Office, and he said, hey, yeah, I've heard that Iran is providing intel to Iran, but oh well, we provided intel to Ukraine and still do. So, oh well, what can we do about it? These things are going to happen. And he's absolutely correct. These things are absolutely going to happen. And let's see here. Layla says, absolutely true. Can you imagine the panic? Oh, yes. But I did see a UFO with my sister and my best friend. We lived out in the country around the cornfields in Illinois, walking home one night from my friend's house, and we definitely saw a UFO. It's a long story, but since we lived near Scott Air Force Base, we had the military question us. That's really interesting, Layla. Strangely enough, I saw an orb back a while back, like I don't know if it was last year at some point, one of those orbs people talk about, and it was very interesting. I took a video of it. I have never seen a UFO. And content for tomorrow. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Like I said, I have a friend who's planning to go out to Piedmont, Missouri, out to Clearwater Lake and camp for, I don't know if it's a night or a weekend, and do like some UFO looking because of course Piedmont, Missouri is the number one spot you're going to see a UFO in the state of Missouri. And some people say across the country there's more UFO sightings in Piedmont, Missouri than just about anywhere. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to go. I'll help plan it even. I would definitely want to go. I've never seen a UFO, but I believe they exist. We're going to talk a lot about all of that tomorrow. I absolutely do believe they exist. And I would love to hear your story, Layla, because that's really interesting. And trust me, and I'm one of those people, if people tell me, "Hey, I saw a UFO, I saw, an alien in my backyard," quite honestly, I'd probably believe you. I really I would never say, "Oh, that can't be true," because I know stranger things have happened. And we're going to talk about that tomorrow because there are some very unusual sightings taking place across the United States right now. And had I had a show yesterday, I might have talked about it a little bit, with a little, oh, they're here, little line thrown in because something's going on. Pam says, hell no, Trump's not going to say he hates China. That would be a low IQ individual saying that. No, yeah, he's not going to say he hates China. But I don't, I think he hates things maybe about China, but again, China owns us. Yes, China. I think of them as being neurotic. If you think about that, the government's neurotic. How they treat their people is absolutely horrendous in some cases. Not all cases. I have met some Chinese people who have come here to the United States who live in China and who are very wealthy. They have a great life in China. They would never leave China. And then I have also met people who live in the United States who used to live in China who said they are terrible communists and the things that they do to their people and the way they work them, are just absolutely horrific. So there's just like any country, there's two sides to the story. I tend to side with the people who say it's a really horrible, thing that's happening there. But people here in the United States say that too. There's people really happy here, and there's people who are not happy. I think the same can be said over any country. But either way, China owns us. There's nothing, we've got to keep a good relationship with China one way or the other. But I do think they're neurotic because they're constantly sending their Chinese nationals in to spy on us. It's like they had this weird, like it reminds me of like a peeping Tom. Or you go to an Airbnb and somebody's put cameras in the bathroom and in the bedroom, in the little nails in the wall. That's what China reminds me of because they have, and it's interesting, they have all these Chinese nationals that come over. Most of them are students. And I can't tell you how many times, and I know you've heard the stories, where they will wander into a military base, restricted space. They just wander in. How they get in, I'll never know. They just walk right in and they'll find them and they'll be like, "What are you doing here?" "Oh, I'm lost. I'm a student. I'm just lost." They always say they're lost. And really, of course, they're probably taking photos or getting reconnaissance or who knows what they're doing. We know that China buys farmland in the United States very near to our military bases so they can listen to communications. It's a really weird thing that I don't understand. I just don't understand it because our communications most of the time are not about China. We don't really have anything much outside of what's going on in Taiwan. And quite honestly, China could at any time go over to Taiwan and say, "We're taking Taiwan back. You Americans, we don't care if you like it or not. We're going to do it." Yes, it would start a war, no question about it, between us and China. But they don't. They don't want to get in the middle of that. And it's a strange relationship. That's what I'll say. It's a strange relationship that's going on. And Jay says almost every piece of technology China has or military vehicle is stolen from this country. That could be, Jay. I don't know a lot about China's military outside of the videos that we see where they must practice a lot on that walking. Have you seen those marches the Chinese military does when they're walking and they're in formation? It is one of the most amazing things. I can't imagine getting that many people coordinated to walk in the way that they do. That's about as much as I know about the Chinese military. I know there's a lot of them. There's far more Chinese military than we have here in the United States, but that doesn't mean that they're more capable, of course, than us. But China's a very wealthy country. I talked about this a little bit the other day. You look at China and some of the cities in China and how far advanced they are compared to what we are here in the United States. I mean, well, what do we have? We have Los Angeles, we have New York. I mean, neither town is all that remarkable. I've been to both. They've got some neat buildings. I like it more for the historical nature in New York and some of the more beachy places, of course, in Los Angeles. But we don't have anything on these, on like a Beijing or on a Tokyo, or if you go into some of the other countries, some of these massive cities they have that are so built up, like Dubai. We've got nothing on that. We're supposed to be this big, wealthy country, but we really don't have much. If you go over to Europe, even their Aldi is better than the Aldi we have here. So we could talk about that all day long, of course, but we cannot. A couple other things I want to touch on before we head out, of course, was Donald Trump talking about withdrawing from NATO. I know people jumped all over me yesterday talking about it because I am all in favor, quite honestly, of withdrawing from NATO. I am all in favor of it. As a matter of fact, I was very angry that we haven't done it yet. Donald Trump in his last term said he was. I'm not going to say he said we are withdrawing from NATO, but he was looking into it. He thought it was a good idea to withdraw from NATO. Some people will say, well, he only said that because he wanted them to pay their fair share, and that's something he was able to get them mostly to do this time around, is to pay their fair share. Now, Donald Trump, of course, is still a little angry right now because he has asked NATO member countries to assist us with the Strait of Hormuz. Now, we have some NATO countries helping us with other things. We're using France's airbase, which got attacked yesterday, by the way. The one that they allow us to use, I think, is that in Qatar? I can't recall where that is, but the French airbase that we use was attacked overnight or yesterday at some point. And so they've helped us out with that. We have Italy's Maloney, giving us some missile interceptors. We've got Ukraine assisting us with drones and, drone operator type drone defense systems and so on. So we've got some people helping us. I know Ukraine is not a NATO country, but very closely associated these days. So they're helping us in that way, but they're not helping us with the Strait of Hormuz. They said, this is not our war. We're not getting involved. There was a country, gosh, I'm probably not going to remember what it was now. There was a country that announced overnight that they are going to assist us in the Strait of Hormuz. If one of you know, is it Argentina? I can't remember. I don't think it would be Argentina because I can't imagine them helping us. But there is a country who said they were going to come in and assist us with the Strait of Hormuz. But they're the only one. Nobody else. Everybody's like, nope, not our problem. We're not getting involved in it. And I think that's because they would love to see Donald Trump blamed for an economic collapse that's taking place in various countries around the world. And Jay says NATO was good once, but now it's that old house you should let go because it's costing you money, but it holds sentimental value. I couldn't agree more, Jay. Good morning, Adrian. Adrian says China trains the kids to synchronize starting early in preschool with coordinated dance. Well, that makes a lot of sense because they're very good at it. Robert says, yes, drop NATO and the UN. I think, I thought didn't we already withdraw from the UN, or am I losing my mind? And let's see here. And yes, we absolutely do, Layla, need to leave NATO and the UN. I just thought for some reason I thought we left the UN already, but I could be wrong. I don't know why I was thinking that we did. Maybe I've got a different organization on my mind because I think we should leave them all. I know we left the WHO, maybe the World Health Organization. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. But for some reason, I was thinking we left the UN. But either way, yes, we need to get out of NATO. NATO countries are not our friends. They want Donald Trump to fail. They never wanted him to get elected. They've always hated him with every fiber of their being. They are not our friends. And I had this argument. If you go on my Facebook page, you'll see a lot of the back and forth comments with a lot of folks who commented on my post. And they really proved my point that the NATO countries are not our friends, are not our allies. They have a completely different belief system than we do, I should say. And what's interesting about that is so many people are standing up for these NATO countries. And I'm like, seriously, your country is going to be part of the Islamic Caliphate in no time. Your country has done a huge disservice to you. But here, Donald Trump is bad. People always say, Orange Man bad. It's like, come on now, grow up. And face the facts that Europe is going under. Most of Europe is going under. They're going to be part of the Islamic Caliphate. And yes, I talked about the Core Five, which I've talked about many times on the show. I'm not making it up. I didn't pull the name Core Five out of a hat. Core Five is part of Donald Trump's strategic plan heading into the future. I didn't make it up. And that is a Core Five. That is the United States, China. We just talked about China, Russia, Japan, and India. And no, and somebody pointed out, no Israel in there. Well, that doesn't mean Israel wouldn't be an ally of these countries. A lot of other countries not included in that Core Five either. Same as the G7. The G7 has a lot of allies, but yet it's called the G7, despite having a lot of allies. NATO is not our ally. They were allies of the Democrat regime. They are not allies of Donald Trump. So I do hope that Trump does get angry enough to say, that's it. We're done. NATO would cease to exist if we withdraw. They would cease to exist. And I hope that's what he does. Because Macron, all they don't like Donald Trump. I'm fine with Italy and Giorgia Meloni. I think she's fantastic, and but the rest of them don't care. They're not our friends. Don't care about them. Robert says most elected officials are not our friends. You're right, Robert. You are absolutely correct about that. They are not our friends. Well, a couple other things I wanted to touch base on today before we end the show. Oh, you know what? By the way, I was going to show you this. I'm going to show it to you now before we get too far. I don't think Russia is going to react to this, but there was an RT news crew in Lebanon, and this is how close an Israeli strike came to them. Now, but here's the thing, I'm going to offer you two sides to this video. One side would be the official narrative that Israel intentionally attacked an RT news crew. Now, I kind of disagree with that, but I could be wrong. But now the RT crew, the official story is that they were in Lebanon. They were heading towards a military base. They were crossing a bridge when an Israeli jet flew by and shot at them, like literally shot at them. Then they stop and they're doing their reporting, and you'll see how close this missile strike is. Now, the news crew survived. They are somewhat injured, I heard, with some shrapnel injuries, but nothing life-threatening or severe from what I understand. And now, of course, the official news story is that Israel targeted them intentionally because they are a Russian news crew. So take a look. This is wild how close this was. But one thing I want you to pay attention when you watch this is that if you look at the area they're in, and if you look where this airstrike hits, you can see there was already an airstrike to that exact same spot in the past. It's already destroyed. So they're just hitting a target that they've already hit.
Further rocket attacks were reported against Nahariya and a minute
left. That was close, wasn't it? That was really close. All right, I'm going to back this up again.
Further rocket attacks were reported against Nahariya and a minute. I think that was less about trying to hit the RT news crew than it was whatever they were already hitting. Because if you notice, that's how precise these strikes are. Because you could see the rebar, they already hit that area. And then they struck that same area again. So they're trying to hit that area. They may not have even known that news crew was there. I don't know. Maybe they were intentionally trying to target RT. I don't know. But either way, it was awfully close. That was pretty crazy to watch, wasn't it? So I want to show you that before I move on to a couple of things. I'm going to go through these things kind of quick just because there's not a whole lot of news to these stories. As you guys probably know, I've been following the story of the missing Major General William Neil McCasland. And this is something I had not heard before. We know that he went missing, what was it, like 20 days ago, I think it is now, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And here, I'm going to tell you two different things. One is that he went missing. He was at his home. A repairman came in to do some repairs on the house. His wife was not home. He left. Nobody knows where he went. It was believed that he went down a trail. They found a United States Air Force sweatshirt somewhere there, still not confirmed publicly whether or not it belonged to him. But we were told, from reports from his wife, that he did not take his eyeglasses, prescription eyeglasses. He did not take his wearables, watch or whatever wearables he had, did not take his cell phone. What he did take was his .38 revolver. He took his holster. He took his wallet, and he took his backpack. They hadn't told us before about the backpack, so that's kind of new information. We don't know what was in that backpack, but he took a backpack with him. Now, here's the second part of the situation, is that I think you've probably heard by now in the media. I talked about this a little bit the other day, but I didn't go too far into detail with it. And of course, now it's all over the news. But he had a kind of a coworker, I guess you could call her, Monica Reza, who also disappeared in Los Angeles just several months ago. And the story there is really weird, is that she and McCasland worked together on a project. Her goal was to build metal, very intelligent woman. She was building a certain type of metal that would go on a rocket, to travel in space. And so therefore she worked on this metal, and McCasland supervised her and was kind of over that project. And he got the funding for the project and this and that. That's how they knew each other. Well, she was hiking in the woods, hiking on a trail. I don't know if it was a wooded trail, but I think it was in Los Angeles. She was with a male companion, not sure who this guy was. Now he complained, he states that he was walking, she was about 30 feet behind him. He could see her, he turned around, she was waving and smiling and everything was fine. He turned around for a second, looked back, and she was gone, just completely gone. He turned around, he looked for her, she was nowhere to be found. They've had search crews out, from what I understand, hundreds of man hours spent looking for her. They never found her, they never found her body. So it would make sense that she either I can't imagine she walked in, maybe she went to the woods to go to the bathroom. I have no idea. You would think she would have yelled ahead and said, "Hey, I'm, 30 feet is not that far away." I think it was 30 feet. It might have been 30 yards, but either way, that's not so far where you can't yell, "Hey, I'm going to stop," and use the restroom. I can't imagine any animal grabbed her and took off with her. I mean, it's possible, but I think they would see evidence of that. She just disappeared. You could say maybe she intentionally disappeared. Maybe she had a plan to go there that day, go out into the woods and disappear for whatever reason. Maybe we'll never know. Maybe she was selling secrets to another country. And I'm just saying that there's no evidence to support that. Nobody has even suggested that could possibly be the case. I'm just trying to think of reasons why these two could have possibly disappeared. And then now you have McCasland, very similar situation, going into a trail system, disappearing, lots of man hours, FBI going into search for him, nothing to be found. He's nowhere to be found. And then, of course, a lot of people are all talking about UFOs and his knowledge. Well, his wife made a statement that said that's all disinformation. That while he was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, while he did supervise research projects, she claims none of it had anything to do with UFOs. He was over the space program. So his duties were more along the Space Force and that type of thing in materials like what he was overseeing for rockets being made, and that he had no knowledge of any UFOs, no knowledge of anything alien in nature. She said those were things. But here's what's interesting about that is that was her statement. That's her statement, that it's misinformation. He's not connected to any of those programs. But here's what's wild is that there are statements by McCasland, and people know him well, that know he has a lot of information and allegedly classified information about, UFOs and alien life. And he was in favor of declassifying this information and telling the public. And then you hear another story his wife told. She said, well, he didn't have any information on aliens, but yet he was involved with, I can't recall the guy's name right now, the lead singer for Blink 182, who's very much into, of course, UFOs and extraterrestrial things. Now, he did work with the lead singer of Blink 182 when that guy was writing a book, about alien life and extraterrestrial stuff. So I find it hard to believe that he didn't know more than what she's alleging. So it's a really weird, there's so many weird things in life, aren't there? It's like the official story and then it's what you know, right? They try to give you this official narrative and then you're like, okay, but I already know this, and this is true. So why are you telling me this to counteract that? There's so much of that goes on these days. And Leela says, if that happened near you, you'd still be talking. I'm not sure what you mean, Leela. Are you talking about the UFO? I'm not sure. Explain more. If that, oh, I'm not sure what you mean, Leila. Please explain it because I'll address it if you do. It might have been about something I was talking about a minute ago. But I wanted to touch base on that McCasland situation because the search continues. No new information as of yet, but they're really intensifying the search. It's really weird that he and this other researcher, both disappeared on trails under very mysterious circumstances. About the BOMB. Yeah, I agree, Layla. Yeah, I probably wouldn't still be talking, that's for sure. I wanted to also touch base on another situation that's unfolding. I saw the news report about this on Tuesday night, and having a son myself, it was a very difficult news piece to see. And I don't even know how I became part of this group, but I apparently I didn't even know I belonged to this group, quite honestly. But apparently I belong to a Barcelona group where there's people who go on there and talk about news and things going on in Barcelona. I probably joined the group maybe a long time ago for some kind of a news item that I don't remember. But either way, I was scrolling through posts, and I just happened to see a mother posted in one of these groups that my son is missing. She said he went out the night before with his friends to a bar in Barcelona. He's a University of Alabama student. He was there on spring break. He was out visiting, he was with some friends, and they were at this big nightclub, very popular place, and he never came home. And we don't know what's going on. We're very concerned. We're very worried about his well-being. Well, his name was Jimmy Gracey. You probably have now since read about him. 20 years old. He's from Elmhurst, Illinois, a student at the University of Alabama. And yes, he was in Barcelona for spring break and went missing. And it's a very crazy case as well. I do think there will be some resolution here, and maybe there has, overnight. And I just didn't, catch up to that this morning. But think about this: 20 years old. And here's the thing, I used to write a crime blog, and I can't tell you how many crimes I wrote about that were exactly like this, if it turns out to be a crime. Hopefully, and trust me, I am praying with every fiber of my being, that this guy is found safe, that he just got lost, that he met this girl and he's just hanging out with her and didn't realize all this hoopla is going on. I hope and pray that's the situation. These cases, unfortunately, usually don't turn out good, but I'm hoping that this is a different story here. But the story is that Jimmy Gracey was in Barcelona again on spring break. There was this popular nightclub all the kids go to. As a matter of fact, it must be very popular because many parents chimed in and said, hey, my son, my daughter was there last night also. They're also there on spring break, or they're students, studying in Barcelona. And so there's a lot of people on the ground immediately, knowing to kind of put the word out. But he was at the bar. He was with a group of friends, and from what I'm understanding, and based on statements from his friend wanted to leave. And he didn't want to leave. He was there hanging out with a girl. I'm told she's an American girl, not a girl from Barcelona. She's an American girl. She was only described as a brunette. I don't know anything else about her, but he didn't want to leave. So his friend left. That happens all the time. And I can't tell you how many cases I've read. And I'm not blaming that friend for leaving. I'm not blaming Jimmy Gracey for wanting to stay. That's, what you do. That's what kids do. But at the same time, I can't tell you how many stories I've written about in the past in my crime blog where you have a group of friends out at a bar, or a couple of friends out at a bar, or out for the night, or doing whatever they're doing, and they separate. The minute a group separates is certainly when trouble can happen. And that's exactly what happened in Barcelona. And it's happened so many times in so many other cases where friends separate, they go their own ways, and then one person just never makes it back. As a matter of fact, it happened with Riley. If you guys can recall, I can't remember the name of that kid, Riley, in Nashville not too long ago. He was there from, was it the University of Missouri or Mizzou? I think it was Mizzou. And he was in Nashville, and he also got separated from his friends, and he got kicked out of the bar. He left on his own, never seen again. Later on, they found his body, of course, in the river. And that was a really horrific situation, of course. And they're talking about a similar situation potentially with Jimmy Gracey. They're trying to search down video saying that there's reason to believe he may have fallen into the river, which is really odd. Now, his cell phone was found. An arrest was made. We don't know who was arrested. We're told it's not the brunette girl, that somebody was arrested, and that person had his cell phone. Now, we don't know. Did they find his phone and pick it up? Did they take the phone, physically from him? We just don't know. And it's such a sad case because, of course, every parent's worst nightmare is to think that your child is out there, potentially alone or potentially injured, or that some harm came to them. And, here he is in a foreign country, and there's different laws. And, his father is an attorney. From what I understand, his father and his mother flew down there yesterday, and they're assisting, trying to search, trying to find out what information they can. And I'm going to guess that this case, whatever the situation might be, is going to be resolved, pretty quickly. I don't know what happened to him. I don't know. Again, all I can do is speculate, of course, in 1,000 different ways. We just don't know at this time. Hopefully everybody's going to say a little prayer for Jimmy Gracey and his family, that he is found safe, because this is just a horrific situation. But I'm telling you, if you have kids, if you have family members, whether you as an adult, don't do it. How many stories have we heard about adults in Mexico, let's say, that's just one example of so many, one example of so many where you go and you hear that people separate. We were at a bar, we were at a nightclub, we were here or there, and they wanted to stay and I wanted to leave. So I left. And then either you, the person that leaves, never is seen again, or the person you left behind is never seen again, or something awful happens. It's just, so many names are flying through my mind right now. All the cases I wrote about, there are so many. It has to be the most common scenario for crime to occur, for foul play to occur, is that you separate from your group. Please, if you have kids, if you have family members, you yourself, don't ever separate from your group. If you are out somewhere, make sure your friends get home safely. I know sometimes you can't. I know I talked to somebody about this yesterday, and they're like, you can't force somebody to leave. And if you're ready to go, what are you going to do? I get it. You can't always do what you need to do, but do your best. Try to make sure your friends get home safely. You yourself, don't separate from your group. It is just not safe, especially in times like this when you're in a foreign country. Just don't do it. Stay with your group no matter what that takes. Safety in numbers for sure. But I just wanted to add that in. That's the last thing really I've got to talk about today. I'm going to keep an eye on that case as well today. I'll be here tomorrow. We got a lot to talk about tomorrow. I want to talk tomorrow a little about some recent sightings, UFO sightings that are kind of peculiar. And then, we've talked a lot about the UFO sighting in Las Vegas because that's like the modern day Roswell, right? That UFO situation in Las Vegas. We're not going to talk about that tomorrow necessarily, but we're going to talk about some new, very similar situations taking place across the United States. It's pretty wild. It kind of freaked me out, quite honestly. So we'll talk about it tomorrow. We're going to talk about that. We're going to catch up on a lot of the things we've talked about today. A lot of things probably going to happen today. If we see Saudi Arabia and Qatar, kind of entering in the situation in Iran, we'll see what Donald Trump says today about NATO, about anything else that's going on. He's very angry right now. He's probably going to be, if you've noticed, he's throwing out a lot of statements the past couple of days. So you can tell his mind is going and reeling over some of these things that are taking place. But you know what? At least he's very cognitively aware of what's going on. At least it's not Joe Biden right at the helm, because God knows where we would be if that were the case. All right, guys. Well, that's it for me today. I've got to run, but I do hope you guys all have a fantastic day. I will look forward to talking to you all tomorrow morning. Thank you for hanging out with me today. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. Have a good day.